Hilarious. Okay. Um. Alrighty. We should be back up. We're only 9 minutes late, and we're good to go. Okay. So here we are, all back live here. It's Monday the 22nd. Corey here with Tom, and this
And
is probably take 2.5 on doing a live. Hoping the connection stays good because I record it on my hand stream. Lovely folks at home. All oh,
and I and I can't see you right now.
yeah, that's I turned my camera
Okay,
in the interest of making things
understood.
go.
We're gonna deal with that.
Um, but yeah, so part of the reason we wanted to do this last Friday and wanted to try again today is there's quite a bit of stuff that's been happening in the utility universe generally. The utility business, even nationally, has been getting a lot more press in the last week than I think it has the last forever. But starting at home, early last week, a few of our utilities filed a couple of interesting, fun applications for some new construction projects. So I thought maybe we'd start with that.
Yeah, that sounds great. We had the what is it? WEC and MG&E come in for the first utility scale storage project in the state. First one over just a couple megawatts that we've seen, and it looks like it's going to be a big one, 110 megawatts of storage at the Paris Solar Park, which is also where they're proposing, along with MG&E, We Energies, and WPS are proposing 200 megawatts of solar. So it's pretty sizable.
Yeah, 110 megawatts of battery electric storage and 200 megawatts of solar photovoltaic, which adds to the 300 megawatts at Badger Hollow and 150 megawatts at Two Creeks, plus some odds and ends here and there that utilities are either applied for or in process of constructing. That's not even counting the stuff that the cooperatives are doing. But it's remarkable that I think it was not that long ago that you and I were both wearing different hats, but we were still talking about applications by our utilities, requests by our utilities to do things like build um, new natural gas facilities, like big natural gas facilities, uh, West Riverside expansion,
That's right.
um, Fox Energy Center expansion, which ultimately did not happen. That one did allegedly changing it, but yeah, it's. What do you think of this whole sort of turnover in the landscape in the utility business?
It's amazing how rapid it's happening. I mean, I was covering battery storage. I used to cover Johnson Controls when they were first coming out with battery lithium-ion batteries for hybrid electric vehicles and all electric vehicles, and the future was certainly the grid storage was part of the future that a lot of folks were expecting as part of the kind of the decarbonization and clean energy trend that shift that we're seeing. But you're starting with the economics of coal and the economics of solar just turning everything on its head, and then you see the lithium ion prices that have just dropped dramatically as well. You know, is it ready? Is it cost effective today? That's one of the questions I have, because I always thought of this as the technology of the future, but here it is. They're proposing it to be built by 2023. Pretty quick, rapid change. I know the utilities certainly um, are seeing shareholder pressure and shareholder interest in clean energy, shifting to cleaner energy sources. But it is dramatic how quickly this is come, how quickly and storage is emerging, and not just renewables.
Yeah, I mean, to be sure, some of it is some of the big boom in the last few years has been a convergence of decline in the decline in cost. Normally look at it look at it, bringing technologies like solar competitive position with traditional resources, but also a little bit of chasing the existing incentives for solar that wasn't that long ago that everyone was timetable on that was um, timetable on that having those incentives come down years, but that's been extended. But there's still sort of a finish line on those. So there's been a little bit out on the solar end, but to be sure, like you'd mentioned on battery electric storage, when Badger Hollow and Two Creeks, when those utilities applied, combination of utilities applied for those projects, part of that pitch was that they're going to build all this solar, but they were also planning on essentially roughing in the project for
Right.
solar, for not solar, for battery electric storage later. And I know when we were going through those cases, me personally, I was like, okay, we'll see that in 5 years, right? We'll see the first one of those. They'll come back in and they'll say we'll add storage to these projects, and it'll be 5 years from. But here we are later, half years later, and already looking to add or build a new project with storage right from the get go. So like, yeah, I mean, it's so the big question I think you brought up in terms of cost, right, is the question everyone asks us. Chris Hubbock from the Cap Times will ask you, roll through, well, what does CUB think about? What do you think about this project or that project? And by the nature of what we do, we have to be very data driven. We can't walk in the room with a preconceived notion of what we should be doing projects. And for folks who might be joining the video now, we have public versus, but we're talking about the new Paris Solar project plus battery storage project that 3 of our utilities applied mission for purchase that beginning of last week. And we were just talking about how the costs. We have to look at the cost of the project in of itself, but cost of the project and the cost effectiveness for customers is sort of related to the separate related issue of this fleet turnover, right? Going from coal to fossil to agreement.
Right.
And I also wasn't last week, but very recently at Alliant also make their announcement that shutting down the Columbia coal plant early. And some of the utilities that are looking to buy the Paris solar facility, also are co-owners of Columbia. Certainly, I would think that would play into their sort of overall game plan for their portfolio and how that looks for customers and costs going forward.
Right. And then the biggest utility proposing the batteries storage project here is We Energies, which is just announced in November that it's going to shut down its older Oak Creek coal plant. And people always get confused when you say Oak Creek coal plant, because there are actually two there. There's the new one that was just built in 2011 and 2012, and then there's the older one that was built in the 50s and the 60s. So they announced this is gonna fill some of the power, some of the needs for powered or electricity generated. A link to that shutdown. So it just shows how this turnover of the fleet is just it's right in front of us. And from a rate perspective, that's been a concern, is how quickly the next round of building, the next cycle of building is coming after we ended a cycle of continuing to invest in coal, investing in natural gas. The utility started doing some wind power, but the rate pressure from that, as ratepayers, we were hoping for a longer break between these big cycles, and a longer break, and utilities kind of assured folks back in the day that, we're going to build all this infrastructure in Wisconsin. Other states are going to do the same, and rates will level out over time. And the challenge for us is our rates remain second highest in the Midwest, for residential and small business customers. So it's at least on average. So you see all this new capital coming in, and it's for us, it circles right back to the issue of, we talked about last time on the live stream, which is how do you deal with those costs of those older plants as they go away?
Yeah, because we're still paying for them. We're still paying for those plants. Likely in some fashion continue to pay for them as we pay for these. But yeah, you're right. There was building cycle in the early aughts, and between then there was obviously investment by utilities, but mostly major investments to try to keep coal plants, controls, this, that, and the other thing. But we are entering sort of a new boom cycle, significant investment. Kind of sneaking in under the radar a little bit. Announced it on 15th. They announced the Paris Solar facility. I'll call it the solar facility storage. They announced that, but on the very next day, We Energies and Wisconsin Public Service also applied for an application to construct a new natural gas reciprocating internal combustion engine project near Rothschild in Marathon County. So most people are focused on what kind of new renewables are we going to put in? What new renewables are going to replace coal? But this looks here like sort of maybe trading coal for natural gas. Potentially, what we're looking at for facilities. So, what are your kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, haven't seen a cost estimate on that one yet. I don't think, because they haven't filed all the information yet. But it is a significantly bigger of these rice reciprocating. Well, this is a tongue twister. Internal combustion engines. I think someone told me to think of them as jet engines in a trailer kind of thing, because then they stack trailers side by side, and it's different than the natural gas plants that we've seen to date in Wisconsin, but it's similar to what the We Energy's sister utility up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan has put up. But again, got to evaluate the capital cost of that for both We Energies and Wisconsin Public Service customers. But certainly the Green Bay Pub Service utility shut down the Pulliam plant in downtown Green Bay, and then the one and then they have an older. This would be built right, I think, on the same site as their coal plant near Wausau. So and there's a newer plant there plus an older plant there, and that one may be on the chopping block down the road, just as the Oak Creek plant. They've already announced as part of their carbon commitments. So lots of applications at the same time, and then there's even a pollution control project for the new Oak Creek plant that just came in last week. So we've got quite a list.
Yeah, that one was a fun one. You had mentioned it to me, and I have a list that I pull up using some search tools on the commission website, and you told me about it. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's not here. Where is it? I had to go rooting around for it. But yeah, there's it seems like there's always some new spend by the utilities, and yeah, it's interesting. I mean, to that point of cost, though, one other thing that happened this past week was that the commission essentially sent out a notice to the utilities about some new filing requirements that they're going to have for them. Really looking at that affordability, something that it's directly related to something that we've been working on, that we've been trying to bring focus to, fall forward on. But maybe talk a little bit about that in terms of what you've been doing there.
Sure. So the commission last week put out a press release. They sent out a kind of a updated requirement for the utilities, and it's in two areas. One is on diversity, workforce diversity and supplier diversity, and the area that CUB has been zeroing in on for a couple of years now is energy affordability. So there's an index of household energy burden, and to date, until in recent years, the utilities or the state PSC have measured that on kind of a statewide or utility-wide level, but that now going forward, they're going to have to measure that on at least a county-wide level basis. And this is something that it's almost as if they heard our live stream or heard our conversation we were having in the office a couple of years ago, because when we were talking about low income issues, one of the questions I had is fairly new to CUB is, well, what more can CUB do for the low income population? And you and I both got to CUB in 2017, and I turned to you and you said, well, if I remember right, we need more data.
Yeah, I mean, it most people think of renewables and energy and coal and affordability and low to moderate income issues, and now, I mean, realistically, social justice issues have always been intertwined with that. Think of them more in terms of just pure sort of policy. People think of policy, they think of more sort of legislative policy, right? Politics with capital P, where certainly one would hope that good laws and policies are based off of evidence, facts, and research, but they don't necessarily have to be. Someone just has to bring together a proposal that passes muster in a majority of people by virtue of their duly elected representatives of support, and that becomes policy. Whereas in our area, it's a little more evidence driven. Why our jobs tend to be wonky. And you asked me that question, it was, okay, well, the simple answer is well, let's just put in a low income rate. Go back to what we used to have the early aughts, where all the utilities had a low income program, and go from there and have it be simple. And certainly that maybe that's part of the path forward. But the part of the issue is that our utilities are very different. State have, even if you just think of the big five utilities, the Energies, Wisconsin Public Service Corporation, Alliant Energy, Madison Gas and Electric, and Xcel Energy West. And they all serve very different parts of the state. Some have very urban areas. Some have, MG&E is basically purely urban for their, well, not purely, but almost exclusively urban and suburban for their electric service. We Energies has a little bit of both. Alliant, I know they feel like they skew a little more towards rural. And we need to know essentially how bad it is and whom and where, in order to be able to come up with a program that's really going to hopefully address some of the affordability issues. You and I both worked on settlements the last couple of years where we had worked with our utility colleagues to include these types of studies in settlement agreements. Say, hey, let's start looking at this very degranularly. I mentioned the commission is stating that this has to be done on a countywide level. We're hoping to get out of the initial studies the utilities were working with, excuse me, that done at the census tract level. But we need to start there, because we don't know what we don't know, other than that there are people that are, personally for me, I'm happy to see the ball moving forward on this, because it's a personal pet project of mine going all the way back to last year. I was on commission staff trying to push this in the direction of where we are now, of the commission saying, no, you shall report on this as a requirement on an annual basis. So it'll be great to see what comes out of that.
Yeah, and it goes back to that old adage: you can't manage what you don't measure, right? And so this moves the ball forward because they're going to want to they're going to be having to submit this data every year, and there's been some initial data that's emerged for certain parts of the state on this. Milwaukee had a city-county climate and equity task force um, that had some research done. And so for the city of Milwaukee, there's information available that shows that in some pockets of some neighborhoods, the energy burden as a percent of income is approaching 13 to 19%. So we know that, and we know there's poverty in Milwaukee, in parts of Milwaukee. That's not a big shocker, but we need to be able to analyze the data and see how that compares with utility bills, and then also we don't have as good a handle on the poverty that's happening in more rural areas, even within We Energy, which is obviously the Milwaukee utility serving the Milwaukee neighborhoods, but We Energies has different customers across the state, whether for electric or natural gas. In some of them in very rural parts of the state. So this will give a better picture toward what we hope can be tailored and innovative programs going forward.
Yeah, because I think related to what you just said is usually you had mentioned that Wisconsin has, especially when we're looking, I would say specifically when we're looking at residential and small commercial, we have the second highest rates in the Midwest, Michigan.
Right.
I know that our industrial advocate colleagues would point out that industrial rates in Wisconsin, I think, are the highest in the. So not great across the board, but that's just looking at it on an average basis. That's actually looking at it on a statewide average, not even necessarily on a utility level. And so,
That's right.
to a certain extent, well, actually, maybe backing up, the commission has looked at in the last last big energy. I think it was like the last two. Anyway, at the minimum, the last SEA, they did this sort of affordability. And on a statewide basis, kind of the data there and what staff concluded was like, oh, it's not that bad, right? Average basis. But that kind of hides the problem. Look at it on average, folks that are suffering from hardship, they're buried in that average. Hopefully, this will sort of bring that to the allow us to up with some.
Yeah, no, it's really good to see that this moving forward, especially because you and I you were thinking about this at the commission, and we started moving this forward through the rate settlements and through our comments on the strategic energy assessment. But it was before the pandemic really put a spotlight on affordability, and before Texas put a spotlight on affordability too, but with the pandemic, so many folks are having a tough time that it'll be interesting to see how the data comes through, what we learned from that, and then how the future years as the economy recovers, how things evolve on that front too.
Yeah, I mean, in the short term, I think the biggest thing we're worried about right now is getting people out of
Right.
any sticky situations they might have right now with their utility bill. If maybe they haven't been able to pay their utility bill and they haven't been disconnected because there's been a disconnection moratorium, but at the moment that disconnection moratorium is set to end in April, and bills are going to come due, and we can find a way to get people out of that. But addressing sort of the chronic affordability issue layered in with that, and that's going to be the on project forward with it.
Yeah. Just a quick thing on that is the congressional COVID, or the congressional next bill on addressing COVID. The House version has just been released, and there is more money for low income in there, and more money for utility and rental assistance, and this time even some mortgage assistance for struggling homeowners who might be facing foreclosure, some of that money can potentially be used or could be used for utility bill aid as well. So it's good to see that. The initial note I saw from the National Consumer Advocate group that CUB belongs to says it's not enough. But it's good to see something in there, and hopefully they can give it a boost before it passes Congress, because these balances are the unpaid bill challenge is going to be significant, and to the extent that congressional relief can come in to help folks who are struggling, I think that's going to be a really important for Wisconsin.
Yeah, we can't really get into specifics because of the nature of confidentiality and stuff, but some of our utility counterparts have started sharing some of that rearage data, that unpaid bill balance with us from the various utilities. It's a lot. It's a lot of money. A lot of folks that haven't been able to pay their bills. I'm hoping that it's all folks that haven't been able to pay their bills. There aren't folks in there that just decided, nope, I'm just going to stop paying. YOLO, we'll figure it out. But it's a big hill we're going to have to climb to figure that out. Varies by utility relative to of that.
Yeah. Yeah, there should be more information coming out from the commission on that in the next weeks and month, and over the next month, I think, because the commission's going to have to assess what to do about the April moratorium, end of the moratorium, and do they allow shutoffs to resume, and that sometime in March.
Yeah. So paying for old plants, paying for new plants, hoping economics works out, dealing with COVID, utility business, and its impact on the folks' pocketbook has probably never not been more front of mind for folks, probably since maybe the Great Recession a while ago now. A while ago.
Yeah. And nationally, it's really in public view with Texas. It's probably the biggest thing since, say, maybe the 2003, was that 2003 blackout in Northeast all the way to Michigan, and then prior to that, the blackouts linked to the Enron scandal and energy crisis in California, and right around 2000, 2001. So, but Texas has really put a spotlight on lack of planning, on lack of some the kind of the deregulated system down there, and it seems as though most of the power is back on, but boy, folks are really struggling, and in some cases passing away, and there's still a lot of water issues, that frozen pipes and all that folks are dealing with. But when you see this getting our little wonky world getting this kind of national spotlight, what's your takeaway on it's early days yet. There'll be lots of investigations into this things, but what's your takeaway on Texas?
Oh yeah. Well, for starters, I mean, I saw something yesterday that the hottest commodity, as it were, in Texas, being able to line up a plumber, fix all your busted frozen pipes.
Exactly.
But yeah, no, you're right. I have admittedly, just in terms of big picture and personal life, I've been a little bit rolling my eyes a little bit, because suddenly everyone on my Facebook feed is a utility thing about everything. But I think you touched on quite a few things. The regulatory structure. Texas is one of the states that went through the process of deregulating the utility industry. So they went one step further than we went in the Midwest, where we sort of separated out the transmission companies so that we could have this regional grid operator. But the utilities are more or less still vertically integrated. They run the part of the grid that connects to your house or your business, but they also own and operate the generation kind of flow that through the market, but it's still more or less vertically integrated, nationally regulated. Whereas opposed to Texas, you have this deregulated structure, and some of the stuff that's been coming out maybe the last couple days, where you're seeing these stories about people getting $6,000, $10,000 bills. And that's because, in a state like Texas, when you sign up for utility service, to be sure, you can just get your power from the company that provides the wires to your house or to your incumbent service provider. But you have, there's a market. You have choice. You can go with an alternative energy supplier, and maybe that energy supplier has been saying, we'll charge you market rates, and look at how low the market rates are. We have all this inexpensive electricity, and so your bills are going to be really low. But maybe from one of the things that we hear from our consumer advocate colleagues in other states is there's sort of a consumer affairs issue there. If you don't understand all the, really understand risk associated with a particular option, you can end up in a situation like this where, yes, your electricity stayed on through the storm and through all the outages, but you're paying 10,000% premium on market rates to get you through that. So there's that regulatory structure. I know some folks have been pointing to the fact that Texas is an island unto itself, essentially, in terms of the which, I get that argument. At the same time, I would probably remind folks that Texas is bigger than, the entire New York ISO, the various regional markets and operators that are in the New England area in terms of geography. Because geographical area is usually the important part there, right? You want diversity across space and time. And maybe there's an element of that if they would have been able to rely on other parts of the grid. They may not have been able, if they had been able to rely on sources maybe out west or mid-Atlantic. But we had, the Mid-Continent Independent Service Operator, MISO, part of the grid that Wisconsin's part of, had to call for rolling blackouts down south in the MISO region, down towards in the southern states that are part of MISO because of transmission constraints. The part of me is like, I don't know if that ERCOT isolated situation is a problem per se. And then you get folks that just come in and be like, oh, this is what happens when you privatize utilities. Get the sentiment, but I got people that I know that are Wisconsin legislators, and I'm not going to say who, but people on Facebook friends with Wisconsin legislators being like, this is what happens when you privatize your utilities. I'm like, understand, the electricity you are using to Facebook post this is coming from a private utility that did not have outage problems. We can talk about returns and profit and things like that as a different conversation, but failure of the electrical grid isn't part and parcel of privately owned utility. And so this is a long way of saying that, our industry intervention is very, very nuanced. People start coming in sort of blunt instrument assessment. Where the failures, it gives me the heebie-jeebies, because then that sort of big capital P political pressure that can come in and start monkeying with the system in ways that maybe have unintended consequences.
Yeah. You definitely had a failure, though, of so many different types of generation and not able to anticipate this kind of weather event. This weather event is more extreme than they've had, but there have been other events, including 2011. I think the Packers were in the Super Bowl when Dallas had some rolling blackouts, and I remember some coverage at the time. Oh, the Super Bowl didn't black out because they had extra generators and everything. But NERC, which is the Reliability Council for the whole country, had issued a report saying, you better winterize your system. And then there was another one between 2011 and 20 that didn't quite hit Texas, but hit like Tennessee and some other southern states, where NERC said winterizing is really a priority. And And that's the challenge is, if utility A in Texas, in a deregulated system, is gonna take the steps to winterize, there's price pressure that comes with that, and utility B is going to have cheaper rates if they're not winterizing. So I think that's one of the big challenges that they're going to have to wrestle with and fix. We often talk about how some states have more sophisticated and planning requirements for utilities. And so a failure to plan and game out different scenarios with extreme weather is going to be important going forward.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I think it's failure is sort of what caused the crisis and catastrophe. Or was sort of an all of the above. Right? You had clear signs that the Texas grid needed to move in a particular direction in terms of hardening. Call it severe weather, call it climate change, however you want to attack that. But there was a weakness identified, and my suspicion, I'm sure we'll have the next conference we go to, the neighbor conference. I'm sure we'll have at least a panel, if not a featured speaker on this,
or an entire day.
probably an entire day on Texas. But my suspicion is that the regulatory structure made it more difficult to essentially force all of these market energy marketers to do what needed to be
Right.
done to harden the system. Whether that's chasing profits or for other reasons, but yeah, it's the physical electrical grid structure, it's the regulatory structure, it's sort of a perfect storm of terrible things happening that caused the crisis that got down.
Right. So I'll date myself, but Wisconsin had some issues back in the late '90s when one of the nuclear plants was down, or one transmission line to the west was down. But this was a little bit of everything. Like the nuclear was down, the coal was down, the natural gas, which was the biggest factor, was down, and then the wind turbines weren't winterized either, so they were down. Wind was a small portion of the big picture because it was mainly a natural gas problem, but it was the same issue with the one in 2011 too, which I remember seeing. Oh, the nuclear plants tripped offline. Oh, the coal isn't working either. So the coal piles froze. The nuclear plants needed water, and that water was frozen. So the thermal plants really had challenges that really seemed like the instigating factor for this thing. I saw some comments from, I think, from ERCOT saying that it could have been even more catastrophic, and this was pretty big. So I'm looking forward to reading more on that, just as kind of the lessons learned. We'll see what the lessons learned reports come out from this. I bet there'll be a bunch of them.
Yeah, I mean, and this does bring a couple of things back home. Is many years ago, CUB was, not saying it's a different CUB. I mean, certainly, but CUB is an organization we opposed utility deregulation for a variety of reasons. Over the years, the issue has come back up from time to time, and I know that when on staff at the commission, I had sort of looked at it just politically, and the last few years with CUB is the issue is people are like, well, it costs less and it pay less. One, not 100%. Like, I'm not convinced on that. Looking at then the second part is, what happened? What does your deregulated utility structure look like? Do you end up in a situation where you can have failures like we had in Texas? Else, or what we saw inherent. But the other part that you had mentioned, the natural gas outage. Certain politicians have been focusing on, the impact of renewables on this. Not a renewable organization, but it wasn't the renewables. It was the 80% of the fleet that was fossil based that had problems and performing the way it was supposed to. That was probably the biggest contributor. But the natural gas thing, there is an issue that hasn't seen a lot of, press even in our field the last maybe few years, is the fact that the natural gas pipelines have these big compressors that make the gas go, pressurize the interstate pipeline to make the gas flow. And historically, those compressors were run off of natural gas. Essentially, they would take gas off the pipeline. Those would then power the compressor to make the pipe. But those compressors in various parts of the country have increasingly been transitioned over to electric, probably for efficiency, cost reasons. But one of the concerns that I saw raised several years ago, I think right around the 2013 polar vortex or somewhere around then, was like, hey, well, if you have a grid down situation, even if it's just rolling blackouts, if you have sort of a grid down situation and you're relying on these compressors to continue to supply natural gas to your increasingly natural gas fired fleet,
Right.
you essentially have this domino effect of, okay, well, now you can't run your natural gas facilities to get things back up and running because you can't flow the gas through the pipeline. And I know people were sounding alarms about that, and I'm curious as to whether, I don't know if this was, but I'm curious as to whether that was a contributing factor, or earlier point of sort of a cascade failure of things, whether that also contributes.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of, like I said, this is a very nuanced issue, very nuanced catastrophe insofar as root cause.
Yeah. No, I'm sure we'll be talking about it again and again, maybe as more of these kind of lessons learned reports come out, and as we go to our conferences and hear what the perspectives are, we can come back and share that.
Yeah, I know we hadn't necessarily planned on talking about it, but I think it's helpful to talk about it a little bit, because I'm not saying there's like I sort of alluded to earlier, I'm not saying there's misinformation running around, but there's certainly a lot of, I would say, amateur armchair quarterbacking going on. And you and I aren't even at the level of expertise in some of these absolute problem, but we certainly know enough to say, well, ask certain questions, get in the right. I feel like certain people may be drawing certain conclusions about what the utility industry look like or how it should operate based off of 20-word blurbs in Facebook.
Right. Yeah. I only know enough to be dangerous, but what I do know is nobody should have an electric bill that's $10,000 for a week or even a month, let alone the stories of these people who are on, I got a $9.99 fixed rate plan, and then everything else is market-based rates. Yikes. And the Texas PSC and the governor were meeting yesterday on an emergency basis to talk about that issue, among all the others that they're facing down there. So we'll be watching that.
Yeah. Blip. Hopefully, I just saw it scream at me. The audio put out. So the gremlins never go away, it seems, but it looks like it's back up and running now. So. But yeah, we'll see where this takes us. And maybe on a less dire note, we've got, we'll probably talk more about it, but you've got in a couple of days, you've got a meeting here in Madison, talking about the future of CUB with some folks.
That's right.
Is that at all?
Yeah. So on Wednesday, there's a joint hearing of both the utilities committees, the Assembly and Senate Utilities Committees. So I'll be testifying at that, and you'll be there to answer questions because you've got the technical expertise. But it's on the PSC omnibus bill. So this is the bill that would actually set up a more stable funding source for CUB. And enable us to more effectively participate in the rate settlements that have happened, that are now the preference for the legislature. So the legislature had passed that law 3 years ago, encouraging utilities and stakeholders like CUB and others to basically negotiate across the table. And instead of just pounding the table all the time and having a long litigated process, but that changed the dynamic of how how we could get funding from the PSC to do for the experts that we hire. And the way it will work going forward is we'd have in-house experts on staff that would actually become our resident experts on all the utilities, kind of like you are already, but having more of a broader based team. And the legislation would enable us to have a staff attorney general counsel again. So we're looking forward to that. We've got widespread support. It was supported by business groups and got unanimous support in both utilities committees last year and the full assembly. And then the Senate never met again. They never reconvened because of the pandemic and then the election and changing of the guard. So we're glad to see it's back and looking forward to it moving forward.
Yeah, maybe our hope is that process will wind its way through fairly quickly, because there was such broad support for it last year, and the copy and paste.
Right.
But maybe not to jinx it. We'll do a more thorough dive into what this means for CUB and how it works after all the ink is dried, because I don't working on it so long to get it to this.
Yeah, no, I kind of, my knuckles got a little raw from all the knocking on wood, so I'll just keep knocking and protect my knuckles, and we'll get into all the details further down the road.
We're getting to the top of the hour here, and before I invite the tech gremlins to come bite me again, I probably wrap it up here in a bit. Was there anything you wanted to mention to folks before we sign off for today?
No, just wanted to appreciate your questions on what's going on with the utility sector and with CUB. Send them either in the comments below or send them to one of our email addresses, or hit us on our website. So we're looking forward to having an ongoing dialogue with folks. So
yeah, that's great. Obviously, like and subscribe if you found this useful. We gonna definitely say thank you if you've watched through this, even on the replay. There is probably some glitchy audio, but for hanging with us as we work through, try to do this. I know from my perspective, I know this doesn't look as cool YouTube videos that we've been putting together, but at least from my end, it's certainly a lot easier because I'm not doing a lot of work in post. We kind of wing it for a little bit and content out for folks.
Yeah, it's good, but they should check out the other stuff too, because you're doing a cool series on how to navigate and make the PSC website user friendly. So it's really, it's a good. There's a lot of good information on the PSC website, but Corey's kind of step by step of making it easy for you to access what you need about your utility is kind of helps fulfill our CUB's mission to inform and educate Wisconsinites. So thanks to you for putting those together, and hope people check them out.
Well, I hope people get some use. All right, we'll probably call that a wrap for today. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you.
Take care.